Welcome to Serial Killer Files, the podcast that ventures deep into the darkest corners of the human mind and the chilling crimes that haunt history. I'm your host, Arthur Morgan, and today we begin a case unlike any other. It's the story of a predator who evaded capture for over 20 years, a trail of victims stretching into the dozens, and a manhunt so complex that investigators turned to an incarcerated serial killer for help. This is the hunt for the Green River Killer, one of the most harrowing criminal investigations in American history. And remember, this is just one of the many twisted true crime stories waiting to be uncovered on Skoob, your AI-powered podcast studio. Download the Skoob app now on the App Store or Play Store and start listening today. Picture this. It's July 15th, 1982. The Green River winds its way through Kent, Washington, a small farming town transforming into a bedroom community for Seattle. This isn't just any river. It starts high in the Cascade Mountains, flowing down into the valley floodplain that stretches north to Elliott Bay. By the time it reaches Kent, 20 miles south of Seattle, it's about 100 feet across, with banks rising 20 feet high, thick with tangled blackberry bushes and dense vegetation. The water levels fluctuate dramatically. Heavy mountain rains can swell it nearly to the banks, while an upstream flood control dam can reduce it to barely a creek. On that summer day in 1982, the river was about to reveal its first terrible secret. A 15-year-old girl named Wendy Caulfield was found naked, lodged against a bridge piling just beyond Meeker Street. She'd been strangled, her own jeans knotted tightly around her neck. It was a discovery that should have sent immediate alarm bells ringing, but it was just the beginning. Exactly 1 month later, August 12th, another body surfaced. 22-year-old Debbie Bonner, discovered about half a mile from where Wendy had been found. The authorities didn't immediately connect these deaths, a mistake that would prove catastrophic. Then came August 15th, 1982, the day that changed everything. 3 more victims were discovered, and this unprecedented finding sent shockwaves throughout the entire Pacific Northwest. Marcia Chapman and Cynthia Hines were found submerged in the water, deliberately weighed down with heavy stones. The third victim, Opal Mills, was discovered in the tall grass on the riverbank, her jeans tied around her neck just like Wendy Caulfield's. 5 young women, all strangled, all found in or near the same river. The pattern was undeniable, and authorities quickly declared they were hunting a serial killer. The media coined a name that would become synonymous with terror: the Green River Killer. Investigators initially believed the killer was using the river's waters to wash away trace evidence, similar to what had occurred during the Atlanta child murders of 1981. The Green River Channel became the focal point of their investigation, but they had no idea how wrong they were about the scale of what they were dealing with. Over the next 7 years, 37 more skeletal remains would be discovered, not in the river, but scattered across remote wooded areas in a wide arc southeast of Seattle. These locations were far removed from the leisurely flow of the Green River, yet authorities concluded they were looking at the work of the same killer. The geographical spread was staggering. The methodological differences between the river victims and those found in wooded locations should have raised questions. But investigators remained convinced. One killer, dozens of victims, and a reign of terror that seemed impossible to stop. What they needed was insight into the mind of a serial killer. And that's when they received an offer from perhaps the most unexpected source imaginable. From his death row cell in Florida, Ted Bundy was watching. The Northwest's most infamous serial killer had been closely monitoring the Green River case through media reports, even subscribing to local newspapers to stay updated. His interest was complex, part egotism, part rivalry, part disturbing fascination. Bundy was undoubtedly envious of the notoriety this new killer, whom he dubbed the Riverman, was gaining. Operating in the same geographical region where Bundy's own murder spree had begun, this new killer was rapidly gaining infamy, threatening to eclipse Bundy's grim record. But there was something else driving Bundy's interest: isolation and a desperate yearning for public attention. His correspondence with Detective Robert Keppel became increasingly detailed. Bundy sent lengthy letters posing numerous questions about the investigation. He was particularly interested in where victims' bodies were discovered and sought detailed victim profiles. He suggested they might not all be sex workers, a theory that would later prove remarkably accurate. Most intriguingly, Bundy speculated that the killer might be masquerading as a law enforcement officer to gain victims' trust. He should know. He'd used similar tactics in his own crimes. The detectives found Bundy's insights relevant because they shared many of his theories. They suspected an unremarkable-looking man who appeared non-threatening, someone targeting women in areas frequented by prostitutes and their clients. This suggested a familiar face on the streets, someone who wouldn't alarm the women who worked there. They also believed, like Bundy, that this killer followed media coverage eagerly, finding twisted satisfaction in reports of discovered bodies and the evident frustration of law enforcement. Despite already holding similar views, detectives believed Bundy's involvement could offer new angles. He was undeniably intelligent and possessed an understanding of serial killer psychology that they couldn't replicate. There was even a faint possibility that Bundy might facilitate some clandestine communication with the Green River Killer, serial killers as members of a grim fraternity. The detectives flew to Jacksonville and drove southwest to Stark, where Florida State Prison housed the most infamous killer of their time. When they arrived, they faced an unexpected delay. Bundy was unavailable due to a prior engagement. How was an inmate on death row too busy to meet? They agreed to return the next day. Florida prison authorities warned them about Bundy's manipulation tactics before escorting them to a Stark interview room furnished with only 3 plastic chairs and a bolted table. When Bundy was brought in, one detective extended a handshake to establish rapport, only to be reminded with each lifeless handshake of all the lives this man had extinguished. While stories circulated about Bundy's charisma and good looks, the man before them appeared surprisingly unimposing and ordinary. Yet his insights would prove valuable, even if they wouldn't ultimately solve the case. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the real killer was hiding in plain sight. On May 4, 1983, Detective Bob Fox from the Des Moines Police Department knocked on the door of a modest home in Des Moines, a suburb near Seattle's airport. He was there to speak with Gary Ridgway about a missing woman named Marie Malvar, who had disappeared after being picked up from Pacific Highway the previous night. Marie's pimp and father had traced her to Gary's residence after identifying his truck as the one that had picked her up. Detective Fox had a personal history with Gary. They'd worked together at a local market when Gary was a teenager. Fox accepted Gary's explanation that he didn't know Marie's whereabouts. The encounter was documented but not pursued further until months later, when Marie Malvar was added to the Green River Missing Persons list. Coincidentally, just days after Fox's visit, the body of Carol Christensen was discovered about 30 miles away in Maple Valley. But investigators didn't immediately link this murder to the Green River killings due to the unusual crime scene, which included peculiar items like fish, sausage, a paper bag, and wine. The Christensen case wasn't officially added to the Green River series until nearly a year later. 6 months after Marie Malvar vanished, King County Detective Larry Gross interviewed Gary. Gary admitted to engaging prostitutes but denied meeting Marie Malvar. Gross concluded that Gary was unlikely to be a suspect. He didn't fit the FBI's psychological profile and seemed quite different from Ted Bundy. But the tips kept coming. By early 1984, detectives began doubting their previous theories. On February 3rd, a prostitute came forward with Gary's name. She recalled being picked up by him on Pacific Highway South in late December and finding him unusually tense, leading her to cancel their encounter. Disturbed by the ongoing discoveries of skeletons, she decided to alert police, identifying him by name after he'd shown her his driver's license to prove he wasn't an undercover officer. This disclosure led Detective Randy Mullinax to open a fresh investigative file on Gary. Mullinax uncovered Gary's previous law enforcement interactions: an arrest for soliciting an undercover officer in April 1982, Detective Fox's visit in May 1983, and Detective Gross's interview in November 1983. Detecting a potential pattern, Mullinax interviewed Gary again on April 12, 1984. Gary admitted he dated Kelly McGinnis, a missing woman, and had noticed another missing woman, Kim Nelson, soliciting along Pacific Highway South. He acknowledged dating women on the Strip between 5 and 10 times, contracting venereal diseases at least 3 times. For Mullinax, nothing particularly distinguished Gary from other typical clients under Green River investigators' scrutiny. So he arranged for Gary to undergo a polygraph test. On May 7, 1984, the county's polygraph examiner concluded Gary was not being deceptive. Based on these results, Mullinax recommended discontinuing the investigation. 6 months later, Rebecca Gard contacted authorities about being choked by an unknown man during a sexual encounter south of the airport in early November 1982. The investigation identified this man as Gary Ridgway. During a fresh interview on February 23, 1985, Gary openly admitted to the encounter. The warning signs were mounting, but the investigation was plagued by problems. The Green River investigation was marked by blunders that significantly impeded progress. Disagreements within the task force over methods, poor decision-making, and failure to connect early murders delayed the killer's apprehension for decades. Disputes arose over obtaining probable cause to search suspect properties, particularly when parts of the criminal profile proved inaccurate. These disagreements escalated so severely that in 1987, some investigators requested transfers to avoid being part of the search for Gary Ridgway. Sheriff Reichert claimed the Green River was under surveillance, but the operations cover was blown by Seattle's KIRO television station. However, this claim was misleading. Surveillance hadn't begun until the night of August 15, 1982, not August 12th, as Reichert implied. If activated earlier, it might have led to immediate capture, preventing the victimization of nearly 65 women. A significant oversight was Reichert's initial belief that Debbie Bonner's murder wasn't linked to Wendy Caulfield's killing, a misjudgment later acknowledged as a critical error. Meanwhile, suspect Melvin Foster underwent numerous polygraph tests between 1982 and 1986, showing signs of deception on nearly all of them. But subsequent evaluations questioned the credibility of the King County polygraph experts' assessments, including Gary Ridgway's no deception result in 1984. The polygraph tests used as screening tools were deemed essentially ineffective. Even the terminology evolved. The Seattle Times introduced cluster in the mid-1980s to replace dump sites, considered dehumanizing. This term was eventually adopted by everyone involved, including Gary Ridgway himself. For years, the killer remained free while investigators chased false leads and relied on flawed procedures. But technology would eventually provide the breakthrough they desperately needed. Advanced DNA analysis technology, specifically short tandem repeat (STR) profiling, proved critical in the later stages of the investigation. DNA recovered from victim Carol Christensen yielded a 13 loci profile that matched Gary Ridgway's profile, providing the crucial evidence that finally cracked the case. This wasn't just any DNA match. It was scientifically irrefutable proof that Gary Ridgway had been in contact with one of the Green River Killer's victims. The same Gary Ridgway, who had been interviewed multiple times, who had passed a polygraph test, who had been dismissed as a suspect by multiple detectives. The man who had been hiding in plain sight for over 2 decades was finally exposed by the one thing he couldn't manipulate or charm his way past: his own genetic material. When finally confronted with irrefutable evidence, Gary Ridgway began revealing the truth about his actions. He confessed to Detective McAllister about choking Rebecca Guay after she bit him, stating he continued choking her with his arm for 10 to 15 seconds, verbally acknowledging, "You bit me." He claimed he didn't recall striking her and watched her flee to a nearby trailer before dressing and departing. During discussions with Detective McAllister, Ridgway revealed his patterns. He frequently dated along Aurora Avenue and within Seattle, scheduling encounters during daylight hours due to his night shift work, from 3:40 p.m. to 12:10 a.m. Since Halloween 1983, he'd been working nights. His only transportation for 3 years was his Dodge pickup truck. His dating activities included motels near the airport, a motel in Auburn, and various locations chosen by his dates. He confessed to camping around North Bend and traveling through Enumclaw using Highway 410 to reach White Pass. He admitted interacting with missing person Kelly McGinnis and acknowledged encountering numerous victims. On March 17, 1986, Ridgway voluntarily appeared at the Green River Task Force office for another interview with FBI agents O'Neill and Askeland. He reaffirmed his account of the gay incident, claiming the bite was forceful enough to cause bleeding and insisting it was the only instance he'd assaulted a prostitute. He explained he'd abstained from engaging sex workers over the past year and a half due to Green River killing threats and because he'd contracted venereal diseases at least 15 times. Ridgway acknowledged a 1972 incident where he choked his ex-wife Marcia and disclosed his habit of procuring sex workers from Seattle and Tacoma streets, using hotels, his vehicle, or workers' apartments. He mentioned parking in notable prostitution zones like areas near the cemetery on Aurora Avenue North and parking facilities of motels like the Red Lion Inn on Pacific Highway South. The Green River Killer case represents one of the most complex and frustrating investigations in American criminal history. For over 20 years, Gary Ridgway continued his killing spree while investigators struggled with flawed procedures, missed opportunities, and a killer who understood how to blend into the background of society. The case ultimately claimed the lives of nearly 50 young women, daughters, sisters, mothers, whose lives were cut short by a man who appeared utterly ordinary to those around him. It took advances in DNA technology and decades of dedicated police work to finally bring justice. Ted Bundy's insights from death row, while providing some useful perspectives, couldn't solve the case that conventional police work and flawed procedures had failed to crack. In the end, it was science, cold, irrefutable genetic evidence, that finally exposed the monster who had been hiding among us. The Green River Killer case reminds us that evil doesn't always wear an obvious face. Sometimes it drives a pickup truck, works the night shift, and lives in a modest suburban home. Sometimes it takes 20 years to catch. But it also reminds us that justice, however delayed, can still be served.